Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Voices of the Resistance, where we give a platform for all who oppose radical Islamic terrorism at home or abroad. I am Will Selber, the owner of Grumpy Combat Veteran Media, and I am delighted to be doing a podcast a day after my birthday. I just finished doing the Bataan Memorial Death March. And thank you for everyone who contributed to our GoFundMe or who kicked in some money to subscription during this time. That money helped us pay for the lodging and food for five veterans and active duty service members. So it was a great success. I was exhausted, my feet hurt, and I feel every year of being 40. But when I got off this long trek, the first thing I did was I opened up my phone. The first thing I saw, I mean, the first thing I saw was a news alert, and it was Surgeon Haqqani, the deputy emir of the Taliban with deep and historical ties to Al Qaeda, who is the Minister of Interior of the Taliban's government, has been delisted, and that the $10 million bounty that had on him and I believe two other members of his family have been lifted. As of today, on 23 March, the State Department has not commented to confirm that this has happened. But I think, you know, his information has been deleted from the FBI's most wanted, or some of the stuff has been deleted, but not everything. So maybe the Trump administration is going to come to their senses between now and when we publish this. And if they do, God bless America. But I am of the opinion that nothing's going to change. And then tomorrow, somebody's going to either have to confirm this or not. So I am here. I'm joined. I'm sorry for the long wind up. I'm a little sleep deprived, but I am joined here by two pros, Afghan experts, people who have a much better understanding of Surgeon Haqqani than this grumpy combat veteran. Of course, combat interpreter John Safi, welcome back. And then Hosna Jalil, former Deputy Minister of Interior for the last true Afghan government that actually represented the people of Afghanistan. Welcome both of y'all. And I'm sorry to be talking about a subject that's not going to be really happy and joyful today. Go ahead, John.
Well, first of all, happy belated birthday. We did not know that. And we also wanted to congratulate you on doing this marathon running. That's quite a lot. I mean, it's gonna take us a while to complete that running. But congratulations. Back to the Haqqani network, affiliated with the Al Qaeda, and they've been responsible for so many attacks in the country. They killed so many innocent people there. It was shocking for me when I heard about it. First, I thought it was a joke. I thought like, "Oh, man, this is like just a joke, people, spreading misinformation, and it could be like one of those misinformation circulating on social media." But then I had to look it up and I had to Google it. And there, like you said, there was not a lot about this guy. The information that we knew about him on those pages, they're all gone. And some of the things have been deleted. So it was shocking. And then when I learned about that ended up going to Afghanistan to negotiate with the Taliban, including Khalilzad. Hope nobody likes him, or especially Afghans.
Zalmay Khalilzad is a former American ambassador to both Afghanistan and Iraq. His relationship, at least through the American lens, stretches all the way back to the George Bush administration. His fingerprints are all over Doha. I mean, for me, he's a traitor to the Afghan people, but I will let the Afghans speak for themselves. And he has his fingerprints all over this. Go right ahead, brother. I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, I mean, like this guy literally handed over the legitimate government in which Hussein Jalil was the deputy minister. He literally handed over to the Taliban, and it is not surprising to me that he's going back and forth to Afghanistan, or as you mentioned, that he might be or a future U.S. ambassador or representative in Afghanistan. I don't think that is surprising to me, and I do think that will likely happen because that's what he wanted. And it was shocking to me that someone who killed so many innocent lives, and there was, through suicide bombers, and he was quite famous for, or infamous for suicide, or the whole network was quite infamous for suicide bombings in the country. And I lost my brothers in arms while I was supporting them back in 2015 and 14, and we lost so many soldiers to suicide bombings. there happened to be from their network. So it was quite upsetting to me and it's surprising too. So in Asina probably has more to talk about this guy. Asina have anything want to talk about?
First of all, happiest belated birthday, Will. You may live a long life full of happiness and peace. When it comes to Khalilzad and Haqqani, okay, so I want to raise 2 points here. It is not fair to change history, and that is what people are trying to do with Sirajuddin Haqqani. If he is beneficial or his faction of the Taliban can be beneficial at this moment politically, that might be debatable. But if somebody would like to change their history and their footprint of what they did to the Afghans, they did to the region, what they did to the rest of the world, I think that's not acceptable. That's not fair. That's not ethical. Yes, they did suicide bomb people. They killed a lot of civilians in the most terrorizing ways, approaches. They've been cruel. They did not have any sort of, I would say, sympathy for the civilians, for the Afghans. They did everything to be back to power. So we are dealing with bloodthirsty terrorist faction of the Taliban. And by the way, the suicide bombing faction of the Taliban has also been the Haqqani. Let's not forget that. Second, when it comes to the US, I would say, policymakers' mentality towards how to deal with the Taliban inside Afghanistan or how to deal with Afghanistan, my points might be more from an Afghan perspective, from the angle that I would see as an Afghan, not as an American, and how that's going to benefit the Americans. All I can say is that there are so many information gaps around this whole thing that it's difficult for me to understand that if there's any strategic goal at the end of all these baby steps that are taken towards engaging with the Taliban. My understanding is that it's so transactional that is not going to benefit the US, that's not going to benefit Afghanistan at all it would do, it's transactional in a way like, okay, well, I'm going to give you this person information about Zawahiri and then you're going to delist me. I'm going to give you your own hostages, the citizens that I've taken as a hostage, as a leverage, and then you're going to give me this. It's so transactional that at the end of all these transactions, I think we as Afghan people, and then you have the American or the US government, we lose track of how many leverages are we giving to the Taliban. We have back home, we have a say that we are giving them a double-edged sword, that we can't take it back. It's going to cut our heads left and right. That is what I'm afraid of, because I cannot trace anything beyond, I cannot trace any benefit to this whole thing beyond a few transactions that's happening. And that's in many ways a package that the new administration can portray to its people.
So let me just respond to that. I thought all of that was very well said, eloquent. We cannot rewrite history. You cannot deny the fact that Sirajuddin Haqqani, let's just take away the Afghans, the 70,000 Afghan security force members that were killed during this war, and which were the wounded much higher than all the civilians. Let's just take all that aside and just look at it from an American combat veteran's lens. And this is a man who tried to kill me personally. I mean, straight up, this guy tried to kill me and my friends. He's killed friends of mine. Friends of mine have been murdered by this man. Friends of mine's sisters have been kidnapped by this man. Friends of mine's, some of the most brutal, horrific things that I'm not even going to discuss have been perpetrated by this man who is a terrorist. I don't care what you do. You can't take away the past. This man's father was a lifelong ally of Osama bin Laden, gave him his first training camp in the P2K area. You can look up Abdullah Azam brigades and how that originated. This is a man, right, that allowed a lot of the Arab ideology, and I'm not going to get super into the Islam, but a lot of that got a foothold because of this man, the Haqqani network, which Admiral Mike Mullen, under testimony in 2008, stated this is a veritable arm of the Pakistani ISI. I think that all of those things are true, and what it is really hurtful for American combat veterans is, what did we fight for? I just what did I go over there and fight for? Because at this point, all I see from my perspective is an American administration, and I hope I'm wrong about this, that was more than willing to use the withdrawal catastrophe to beat up on the Biden administration. And you know who likes to beat up on the Biden administration? This guy right here. Happy to do that. However, the Doha Agreement was the initial stab in the back that gave the mortal wound to the Afghan government. Anything we could have done other than that, the Afghans, I'm a firm believer, could have figured it out. If we just would have left and been like, we're leaving. Instead, what we did, and through the magic Afghan, Zalmay Khalilzad, who is not an Afghan who I've ever heard one Afghan say good things about, delivered our allies to the very people who conducted the 9/11 attacks, killed 3,000 Americans, delivered them to them by restricting their ability to do offensive operations the last few years. And then, as everything tumbled, there was a moment, and I don't know who made the decision, but there was a moment when somebody decided that we weren't going to provide air support to the Afghans. And you can see this whole thing being played out over the last few years, right? We have seen the rise of Sirajuddin Haqqani through multiple New York Times columns, which is portraying him as a moderate. And this is the same organization and newspaper that published a column written by Haqqani. I've heard Barnett Rubin, but who can say? Wrote an essay saying that there was no military solution to the war and then absolutely conducted one. I want to give y'all more time to talk, but I wanted to just, for my American listeners that maybe don't understand why this is such a big deal, I want to hit them with the American perspective because it's important. But the real reason why you should care, in my opinion, is because the very people who fought and served with American forces, the people who believed in us, they're the ones that have to live through this hell. And by delisting him, even though he was already traveling, even though it was a farce, fine. By delisting him, now you've legitimized him. And you know why I know this? Is because I look at all the Twitter social media feeds and I see them all just, they're in celebration mode, and they should be. I mean, what they've been able to conduct by giving up one American hostage when Zalmay Khalilzad arrived this Friday. I mean, he's gone on the Hajj. He's a statesman, and now he's delisted. I mean, we might as well all call him Minister Haqqani, because that's what the American government has done to a man drenched in American, European, and Afghan blood. Sorry, I had to go on a little rant there, my friends. Go ahead and respond. Whoever wants to go first.
I mean, I totally agree with you, but I used to think that the Biden or the previous administration was like, I mean, not a little bit. They were pretty nice to the Taliban. They were making tons of deals, with the Taliban, and they were money sending back and forth and messages back and forth. And I was like, well, because there's not a lot of veterans working for the Biden administrations. But now, when we talk about Trump administrations, and like even the Vice President JD, he went on Fox News and he was talking about Haqqani. Even the National Security Advisor Mike, he went on Fox News and he talked about Haqqani himself and he called him terrorist. But like it is like it's even more shocking when you see those veterans who fought the Taliban, shoulder to shoulder. I mean, who fought the Taliban, who lost friends, brothers fighting the Taliban, and now they're the ones dealing with the Taliban, and they're delisting those terrorists who killed their fellow brothers in the fight with the Taliban. Like let's say, like Mike, the National Security Advisor, and now they're like the because this administration, the Trump administration, was the one who initiated the Doha Agreement, in which the Afghan government was not part of it at all. And that's why I said it earlier, like, because they literally handed over the legitimate government to the Taliban. And I'm not doubting anything that this current administration is planning or is going to do with the Taliban. If you talk about the embassy, that is going to happen. Or if there's anything else that they want to do, there is going to happen. But if they're going to do it step by step or kind of slowly, is because they don't want any Americans to criticize them for what they're doing with the Taliban or with other terrorist groups. It's because they know that the people will raise their voices against him and says like that's not what you promised before the election. So I think things are pretty scary and things are pretty upsetting, and for Afghans too. I mean, it was shocking for a lot of Afghans. It was shocking for me, and It was shocking for Hassanajani, and it was shocking for everyone else abroad and even in the country. Like, this is not what we wanted. We wanted to get rid of the Taliban. We don't want to live under this brutal regime. We don't want to live under their brutality in which our sisters or daughters cannot go to school. But all of a sudden, the current administration did something that surprised everyone and kind of shaken everybody.
Well, when it comes to how bad the news was, I think that was the worst news that I woke up to in the last 3 years. The Taliban announced that, well, girls cannot go to school, and then they announced another ban on women. We woke up to how they mistreated our colleagues that we worked face to face together. And I think among all of them, this was the worst one because the impact is so broad. It's way too broad. Disarmed all of us who resisted Taliban's brutality in many ways. It was one of the baby steps that disarmed us in many ways. It's very much, I think, how heavy it is. I would compare this as one of the components of what happened in 2020 as Doha deal. I think we still are not able to lift the weight of Doha deal. And I think they're adding more and more weight to it. So this was definitely one of the worst news that I heard in the last 3 years among all the bad news that we had. From an Afghan perspective, again, it is the Taliban have presented themselves who they are in the last 3 years, definitely gradually. Everybody, like across the world, knows. Afghans, of course, knew that even in 2020. But the rest of the world already knows what the Taliban does, already I would say, can read Taliban's mentality, can read what kind of an Afghanistan they want. We don't want the Taliban as our ruling regime because of their policies, because of their behavior, because of their vision for Afghanistan. But I'm amazed how the rest of the world, knowing that Afghanistan under the Taliban cannot be a good member of the international community at all. Apart from threat, apart from instability, Taliban has nothing in their hands to offer. And I still am not able to understand why Taliban are given blank check one after the other, how that's going to benefit the Americans. And just going back to our definition of Khalilzad being the middleman in between all these different transactions and deals. It's interesting to me because I find the person very interesting and mysterious in a negative way. That is like, okay, well, if you talk to an Afghan, they would say like, well, he's not an Afghan. He's born in Afghanistan and he's not an Afghan. The reason is because he was the U.S. ambassador in Afghanistan, as I think the first U.S. ambassador in Afghanistan post 2001. And he consistently told us that he's not an Afghan. He represents the U.S. and the U.S. interest. And we are like, well, he himself is saying that he's not an Afghan, so let's take him for who he is, for who he describes himself. And we are like, okay, well, now we don't have any complaint to whatever you're doing because you're representing the U.S. interest, and then blah, blah. And then what happens when you talk to any American, they would say, well, he's not a good American, or he's not an American. He doesn't represent us. So end of the day, who he's representing, that makes him, to me, an interesting person in a negative way, unfortunately. So in the middle of everything, you'll find him as the devil of the whole story. I think our definition of Khalilzad definitely is not a good one. We cannot expect anything better than that from him. Why he's pushing the Taliban and how he's pushing the Taliban, I think everybody is clear on that. Just going back to, I would say, how he has been lobbying for the Taliban at least for the last 5 years, at least that I can follow. But it's kind of shocking and disappointing to see that the world has seen for the last 3 years, has seen for the last 23 years, and they're still doing what they used to do, and they're still taking back Afghanistan to 23 years back, and is still ignoring or looking away from the sacrifices that hundreds of thousands of people gave for bringing Afghanistan to where it was in February of 2020.
Very well said. There's a couple of things that have been mentioned I want to kind of explain. Zalmay Khalilzad played the critical role in the Doha Agreement. There is no Doha Agreement without Khalilzad, without Mike Pompeo, and then without President Donald Trump. That is the line of how that worked. And I would tell you that because I was in the United States Embassy in Kabul the last year. I actually met the Magic Afghan in person. He does not remember me. I tried to talk to him about some things, and he completely blew me off, which is totally like his persona for those who haven't met him. There is rumors that, and who knows if they're accurate or not, but I'll just, rumors that Trump is interested in opening up the U.S. Embassy again with Khalilzad as the U.S. ambassador. I can totally see this. This would, solidify Khalilzad's economic interests, which are vast inside of southern Afghanistan. Google is your friend, folks, but I'll put a couple of links in there if you want to get a little interested in some of the dirt on Khalilzad. There's tons of it. But for those who know anything about the Iraq War, he's the Afghans' Ahmed Chalabi. And for those who don't know who that is, that should kind of ring a bell here for us. Um, there's also rumors that the reason why Haqqani has been built up is because he provided intelligence to the Central Intelligence Agency because to kill Zawahiri, the replacement for Osama bin Laden, which was on a drone from a base coming out of Pakistan. It's the only way that could happen. And they killed Zawahiri in everything I've read, Haqqani guest house. And that by doing that, he was able to parlay that into a narrative that the New York Times bought that was a moderate voice. And now, under the Biden administration, he was able to travel freely and he went to the UAE last summer, right? He was able to say hello to everybody. And then he got to go to the Hajj. Oh, that's always good for everybody back home. It boosted his wasta, all that type of stuff. And then he came back and then he went away again for a month, from what I've been able to put together, back to the UAE. Who knows where else he went? Probably fundraising for all of his terrorist activities. Maybe he said hello to Jelani in Syria. Who can say? But he's now back and he's stronger than ever. What I have seen, and I want y'all's opinions on this, there's a lot of rumors going on right now on the 23rd of March that Afghanistan is going to be put on the restricted travel list. There's been a lot of smoke. I will just say that from rumors, I can't verify that there are things being put in place to start deportations. I don't know if things are accurate, but I have friends who have friends. I'll just say that. I am very concerned about this. I have not spoken out about this because I wanted the Trump administration to have time to come up with something of an Afghan policy. So I've been a little restrictive on what's going on with the SIV P1, P2s because you have a lot of organizations that do that. But from everything that I'm seeing and all the tea leaves, once you get Zalmay Khalilzad back in the mix, you start delisting people, you start restricting access to people getting here. The next eventual step is then to try to get them back. Because what Zalmay Khalilzad will allow the Trump administration is that he can walk out into a bunch of cameras and say, actually, the Doha agreement was great. And now that we have it under President Trump, we can enforce it. That's what I think this is going to happen. And he's going to sell a narrative that it's actually perfectly fine to send the Afghans back here and that it's going to be just fine. I hope that I am absolutely wrong on all of this and that somebody in about a year can show this whole video back to me and can say, you were wrong, grumpy combat veteran. That's not what happened. If this is all a triple bank shot to kill Haqqani 4 months from now, I will clap my hands and stand up. But until that occurs, I'm left with the impression that we are now getting into an anti Afghan policy by the Trump administration and a pro Taliban and pro Sunni radical Islamic jihadist stance because he continues to validate Jelani in Syria. So this is a pattern. So for me, I'm very concerned about not only for my Afghan brothers and sisters behind enemy lines, but for those that were lucky enough and blessed enough to make it to American or, American shores, I know that this is Ramadan and there's a lot of stuff going on. And I would just say that, for everybody who is listening, my thoughts and prayers are with you. And there's a lot of stuff that's going to come out, I think, in the next month. And I would just say to my friends that this is a good time to have all of your documents on you. Keep any legal document that you have. And that way you have it. So anybody who can stop you, you have it immediately. I think we're at that point. We're just giving those type of helpful hints. is warranted. And I usually don't try to get this worried on live podcasts, but it's now gotten to my point where I'm a little bit alarmed. And I'm going to let a combat interpreter and Hosna respond.
Yeah, it is concerning for us Afghans in the United States. I'm close to working with a lot of Afghans with the refugee community here, and I've been hearing from a lot of them. Some of them are still waiting on their SIV or common pool, what they call it. They haven't received anything yet. Some of them have been approved and submitted their applications for green card. They have the same concerns, and there are tons of uncertainties for them, and they just don't know what would happen to them. And as you mentioned, and I believe this is going to happen, and as you said, if this administration ends up opening its embassy in Kabul and sending uh, Khalilzad, somehow he's going to convince the Trump or Trump's administration, like, oh well, Afghanistan is peaceful, and now the Afghans can return. But the matter of fact that the Americans need to understand not just Afghanistan, but our culture, because those SIVs or P1 and P2 or people who supported the previous governments, they're the ones who fought the Taliban. And it is part of our culture. Revenge is a big deal in our culture. People like the same people that we fought, the same people that SIVs or P1 and P2 fought, they're back in the government. They're back in the cities, or they're back in their villages. They're looking for revenge. And we Afghans look for revenge for, like, we wait for thousands and thousands of years, and then we still say it's too early. So Khalizat or the Americans need to understand that if those Afghans get deported to Afghanistan, the same Talibans that they fought, they're going to go after them. And there's still they have those grudges, and the hostility is still there. And they will target them, not only target them, but they will target their families, just because they will say, you killed my brother, you killed my family members, you're the ones coming after us in the middle of the night, and now this is what I wanted. And that's exactly what would happen to those Afghans. I hope it doesn't happen, but if it does, it is going to be a disaster for Afghans. And there's so many, I mean, I've been hearing from folks that are still in Afghanistan, stranded under the Taliban brutal regime, that some of them cannot leave their house, and some of them already been targeted. They lost family members, and they were just hoping to get out of there somehow. But now they're hearing like the Afghans are already here. They may come back or be deported to Afghanistan. So it's been concerning for everybody. I'm hoping that it doesn't happen, but you know, there is a little bit of reality to it, and we just like the things that's been happening. Everything is possible with the current administration. So with the people like Khalilzad, who's there and telling uh, lies to lots of Americans, and they take it and they buy it and say, well, he's an honest guy, which he is not, and we can see that from the Doha agreement that he was a big part of it.
I just want to echo Safai, and he put it beautifully about how Afghan culture, when it comes to revenge, how it works. If there would be a deportation will, to me, I would translate it into setting up all these Afghans who served Afghan government and who has been aligned with democratic values and have worked with the US and coalition forces in diplomatic missions, or I would say international community in Afghanistan. The deportation, or even thinking of or doing, as you mentioned, creating a legal ground for this deportation, to me means setting up all these Afghans for mass murder. That's how I would say. And I'm going to be part of it. Trust me, if there would be a deportation, well, I am qualified to be in the first round of deportation. And the problem, apart from the fact that the Taliban returned with a lot of grievances to take revenge based on that, the 2.0 version of the Taliban that were sold to everybody except for Afghans, because Afghans didn't buy into that. Our interpretation of that version of the Taliban, or the second round of the Taliban, was that, well, one of the differences that the Taliban would have is that they would come with more grievances to take revenge. They're more revengeful. And that's what they are. They've proven in the last 3 years that they have taken revenge on literally everybody. So if the Taliban can stab somebody with a knife inside Europe for tweeting against the Taliban, what would happen to all these Afghan P1, P2 paroled, I would say, SIV holders when they return back to Afghanistan? apart from, again, echoing what Safai mentioned about like Afghans wait, I don't know, 1,000 years to take their revenge, and it passes generation to generation. Apart from that, they're not going to come after us. They're going to come collectively after our families, after our loved ones. And that's exactly, again, what they have done in the last 3 years. I don't think there's anything hidden when it comes to Taliban's behavior. It's all over on the internet. Somebody just needs to Google and see how the Taliban are doing to all these people. So to me, again, creating a legal ground for deportation means creating a legal ground for mass murder of the Afghans inside their own homes. Otherwise, will all of us who came in 2021 to the US or before that, Afghanistan may not be comparable with many other countries in terms of security, stability, whatever you call it, but it still is our home. No one wanted to leave that home. We have so much emotional attachment to that home. We found it so difficult to recreate a home for ourselves in the US or any other country. If it wasn't specifically a life-threatening situation for any of us. So yeah, to me, it looks like setting all of us up for mass murder.
I just wanted to add. I just wanted to add a little bit. The National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz. I co-authored an article with him back in 2020, in which we spoke about interpreters, and his own interpreter was murdered along with his family members. And the article is available. It was published through Military Times, and our audience can find it. So me and him and Jason, we spoke about those who supported us in the last 20 years. And he was so serious about taking those guys out. And now, if it does happen, I don't know how he will respond to the same article that he wrote with us, talked about interpreters in his own interpreter that who was killed along with his family members. So it's quite shocking and unbelievable for a lot of us that we don't honor our promises that we make to those people.
Very well said. All points. You know, Mike Waltz served in Afghanistan. He was a Green Beret. I don't know him personally, but I know he's been an early and loud advocate of holding people accountable for the withdrawal. I'm happy that the DoD is going to hold people accountable for the generals that made mistakes, and I wish they would do that for the politicians too, which is unlikely. But nevertheless, I was happy to hear him and talk about this. But if you're then going to do something like this, which is legitimize Sarajun Haqqani. You're the national security advisor. This is absolutely your lane. This is your lane. It's your lane. It's JD Vance's lane. Another veteran. It's Tulsi Gabbard's lane. Another veteran, director of national intelligence. Right. The congressman from Florida, Brian Mast. It's his lane as a foreign affairs committee member or chairman. I don't remember if he's been approved. I mean, it's all of their lanes, and you cannot tell me that they don't know. So there's a couple of other rumors that this is all part of this big plan to get Bagram Air Force Base back, and that'll allow us to project power against China. And this is actually a big plan, and Trump has laid the trap. And you know what? If that's what it is, I am so happy to hear that. And if that's what happens, I will do a podcast when we get Bagram Air Force Base, and I will still say the following. What you've done now, though, is solidified the rule of a gender apartheid regime who is going to use the protection that you have given them to plan further attacks against the homeland. It is part of the Taliban's ideology. It's part of Al Qaeda's ideology. It's part of all of their ideology. As somebody who spent way too much time in the American intelligence community, I will just say that the American intelligence community has a propensity to do navel gazing, and they'll be like, "Well, it's the Haqqani network, it's the Islamic State, it's the Taliban, it's TTP, it's IMU, and that's all great and important, but when you start just chopping them up like that, you have a propensity to miss the bigger picture, that they're all related, that they all know each other, that whatever their beefs are, they can always put that aside for the bigger existential threat, which is always going to be the United States, and it's always going to be the West. Because if what happened in Afghanistan stayed in Afghanistan, I'll be honest with you, I probably wouldn't be doing this podcast, and I probably wouldn't have so many Afghan friends. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. But it's one of the big reasons why I try to hit my head up against a wall repeatedly. Hopefully, it makes a loud enough noise because it is a. I mean, if you are if these rumors turn out to be true, which I hope they're not, that'd be great. If these rumors turn out to be true and we start deporting Afghans back to Afghanistan, it is a death sentence for them, for their families. And the Taliban and Haqqani and the Pakistani ISI know our American intelligence community like the back of their hands. They know that we will be looking for a centralized command structure to conduct these type of assassinations. That's not how the Taliban will ever do this. If you guys want to take a look at how they will do it, take a look at the last year of the Afghan government's reign when they were doing a ruthlessly effective assassination campaign. And it was decentralized and it was targets of opportunity. And it's going to be that way. And it's been that way for 3 years because it is about a commander maybe traveling to another province and seeing somebody that he remembers fighting 3 years ago, God knows where, and being like, I remember you, bam. And then they get killed. That's how this game is played. That's why you have American combat veterans still to this day supporting Afghans who are underground in Afghanistan until they get the ticket out. And so for my American audience, and we can talk about this, the reason why you haven't seen this in the headlines that much, in my opinion, is because there wasn't a lot of criticism on Biden from the media during the 4 years he was in. So, over the last 4 years, the Biden administration, hush hush, has allowed thousands of Afghans to come to the United States, and rightfully so, through the P1, P2, that's a refugee process for those that don't know, through the special immigrant visa process, which is historically known for combat interpreters like John Safi, but also it can be for anybody that worked for a Western government or a corporation that did business there. But it's really these parolees, asylum seekers, and the P1s and P2s. This is where you get the Afghan fighters, the soldiers, the general officers, the deputy minister of interior, all of these senior ranking people who may not have met the definition of an SI, but they absolutely meet the definition of a P1 and asylum a parolee. They all meet these criteria. And if there is any type of idea that Afghanistan is going to be safe for any of these people coming back, that is a foolish thought and it's easily refuted. And and I hope that this is all going to change and it doesn't happen. But if the Trump administration thinks that America's combat veterans are going to sit back and let them take their friends and send them back to Afghanistan, boy, are you mistaken. And I am talking about like a loud, like thunderous roar from American conservative combat veterans who supported Donald Trump. And I'm not one of them. I'm a conservative, but I didn't vote for him. I voted for Kamala Harris. God bless me. All of us are going to be mad. And if it actually happens and American combat veterans see their friends and interpreters sent back to Afghanistan, if you thought that the suicide rate was high, oh, buddy, you better strap yourself in for the next round because it's going to be astronomical. It's going to be a wave, a tsunami of moral injury that'll just wipe out another good thousands of my brothers and sisters who spent their last 20 years of their lives dedicated to defeating Al Qaeda because they killed 3,000 Americans. And for 20 years, America was proud of us and wanted us to go over there and befriend our Afghan allies. That's what I went over for. I learned the language. I spent my entire career learning Afghanistan. And now, on my 47th birthday, the Trump administration has decided to shake hands again with the people that killed my friends. And I take that very personally. One of the things that my complaint with the Biden administration was that they just look at this Afghanistan thing as purely transactional. If we do this, then we get the Bagram Air Base, then we get an embassy, then we get this, and then this. Maybe you think that's worth it. I would just say there's something called honor. And that's something that Americans have lost comprehension of because they think foreign policy and war is about equations and bullets and guns, and that's all true. There's all parts of it. But men and women go to war and risk their life for their brothers and sisters to the left and right of them, and that's also Afghans, on honor. And when you dishonor an American combat veteran, and that's what this move is. It's completely dishonorable to a generation of American combat veterans. Hopefully, the State Department will come to their senses. But it's going to just destroy us. And not to mention what it's going to do to our Afghan brothers and sisters, who, as always, as I always say, they're the real victims of America's betrayal. And for all of my Afghan brothers and sisters out there, I just want you to know that you are always in my prayers, and I am sorry that you had to hear this news in the middle of Ramadan when fasting is hard enough on the last week. I know that people are very stressed out, and this didn't help. So just want you guys to know that you all are in my thoughts and prayers. John, go ahead and feel free to say whatever you like.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It is the same feeling of every single veterans. I'm still in contact with a lot of my friends, my brothers in arms that I had the honor of serving with, and I get the same messages from them. I will give you a short example. Like 8 years ago, in Trump's first administration, when he was talking about mass deportation, I was waiting for my citizenship. I had all the legal documents, I get my green card and everything else, but I was still getting tons of messages from friends from all over the country, like, "Hey, just please come to our house. We'll house you, and nobody's gonna touch you, and we're gonna fight for you, man. We're gonna die for you because you have saved us." And it's just not my story; it's the story of every interpreters in P1 and P2, and those people who supported us, and soldiers who fought shoulder to shoulder with us. And so I hope it is a rumor. Just you mentioned about a bunch of rumors like the Bagram, and also some people say there's one rumor that I would like to add for the Afghans that circulating, like, well, the United States government is trying to make deal with Haqqani just because he's a moderate vice and their so-called supreme leader. He's a hardcore Taliban. He doesn't believe in modern Afghanistan. He doesn't believe in women's rights and self-determinations and so forth. So that's what the Western community wanted to replace him with Haqqani just because he's a moderate vice and he's a moderate guy and he will change. He will make lots of changes, especially when it comes to women's rights and in their education. So that's something that they're fitting into Afghans' mind just because, that's what we want to deal with them. But we'll see what the future holds for, those answers. But yeah, I'm praying that nothing happens to those who are already here. And just because, this is like Hosna Jalil mentioned earlier, that she did not choose to leave his country. Afghanistan is every Afghan soul. You can't take it out of their soul. Nobody chose to leave their country, but they were forced to leave their country. They were forced to leave their loved ones. They were forced to leave their family members. They were forced to leave their friends. And now this is the United States is their forever home. And if this administration is talking about deportations and mass deportations, they're just basically killing those Afghans who supported us in the last 20 years.
Again, echoing what Sophie mentioned, most of us, we did have the opportunity to be in the US or any other Western countries. We did have visas that we didn't use it because we wanted to stay home again. Again, our home was not perfect, but I think Sophie had a better definition of Afghanistan for us, that it is our soul. It's not just a home for us. All I'm hoping at this point in time is to see, I would say, a better rationale behind what's happening in Afghanistan, something that would benefit mutually the Americans and the Afghans as well. And I do hope that whatever that's happening with Afghanistan, with the Taliban, is not so transactional that later, because we haven't been part of it, we would feel like we are betrayed as Afghans. And for the Americans, that they would regret it. I do hope that that's not the case. But at the end of the day, Will, I'm speechless here. There's no justification that I can bring to myself to justify what's happening with Haqqani being delisted or being provided a blank check, even if that would be taking background. Take background for what? Back then, when the U.S. was present in Afghanistan, the Americans and the U.S. government was loved by most of these Afghans. You had an army, a full-fledged, like well-trained, well-equipped army that was in support of the Americans. There was not this negative narrative around Americans, apart from like a small group of the Taliban, of course. You did have the new generation that would have been the future leaders of Afghanistan. They looked up to the Americans and the American way of life, the American values. But I mean, even if the Americans would take a background for what? Would they stay in background? Would they be able to maintain background? Would they be able to use background to deter Iran or any other US national security threat? I'm not sure. It's going to be nothing more than a base with walls. It's not going to be anything more than an infrastructure that is not going to be of any use for the Americans. All I'm saying is that I do hope that there's a deeper and strategic level goal behind all these steps that is being taken, that are being taken, that would mutually benefit both nations.
Very well said. I'm going to kind of wind up the show. First, thank you, uh, John, for coming on last minute. Hosna, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for all the work that both of you have done to help the Afghan people throughout your entire careers, and also the American people, because our Afghan allies for 20 years, they fought not only on the front lines, they fought at home, because if you worked for the Afghan government or you worked for the Americans, you also made a deal with the lives of your family members. You put them in jeopardy. That is a part of this whole thing. Okay, you join the government, and the higher you go, the more of a target you are. And so, what our Afghan allies did was way more than what any American soldier did, because even somebody like me, who did 3 years, over 3 years in Afghanistan in 4 separate deployments. That's a long time. People did a lot more than me as well. But for our Afghan brothers and sisters, they served 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and so did their family members. There was no home to go home to. There wasn't a possibility that somebody could kill you. The last year, I'm just going to say that, I saw what the Taliban did to my friends, that they were, when I first got to Afghanistan in Kabul, people would see me, no bulletproof vest. By the end, people were all up in armored SUVs, bodyguards, and, they were all had all the body armor. I am very, very sad to hear all of this news as somebody who has spent his entire adult life fighting Al Qaeda and their allies, because that's what the Taliban is. It's an ally of Al Qaeda and always will be. I am beyond depressed because of this news. It is disheartening, but I won't leave completely on a downer. I will just say this. One of the things that has always impressed me with the Afghan people, and it's one of the reasons why I think I fell in love with the Afghan people and their culture and their language and stuff like that, is that I've never met people who are, unfortunately, because of history, incredible survivors. There is a grit and determination to Afghan people that I have never seen, and I've traveled the world over. And that they can survive almost anything. And I hate that they're going to have to endure even more. But my hope is always with that generation of Afghans that Hosna was talking about, and that we talk about on this show and all of our shows repeatedly. Um, that there is a generation of Afghans who remember, and even if they don't like America anymore, which I wouldn't blame them, God bless you. If you think we suck because of this and you're listening to this and you're like, I hate the Americans for what they did, I totally get it. I don't blame you. I would hate us too. But that there is a generation out there that are in the United States that is a much better long-term counterterrorism option. For those that are just dollars and cents and they don't give a crap about Afghan women or beheadings or floggings or gang rapes or whatever. They just don't care. Whatever. That's fine. I was just telling you that you might get a couple of years of peace out of this, but when inevitably our interests deconflict, they will be ready to launch bigger and better terrorist attacks against us, because now we are absolutely giving them time and space to get really ingenious. And when you give Al Qaeda, that is now has free reign in Syria and now in Afghanistan, I'm just saying, if you think it's going to be planes going into the World Trade Center or stuff like that, no, no, no. It'll be different. And it'll be stuff that we haven't even thought of, because Al Qaeda studies us way more than we study them. And you know why I know that? Because we lost the war. That's how I know that. And it wasn't our Afghan allies' fault that we lost the war. It's because the American government lost the will to fight. Don't blame our Afghan brothers and sisters for not being able to defeat an enemy that our own military was not capable of fighting and defeating militarily throughout that time period. And at the end, the reason why the Taliban was victorious is because their ally, Pakistan, they didn't leave the battlefield. They stayed right next to them as they marched right into Kabul. It was us, the Americans, and it wasn't NATO who actually wanted to stay. It was us that retreated from the battlefield and then had the temerity and the dishonor to blame the Afghans for losing this war. And now we have decided yet again to double down on the dishonor by delisting Sarajin Haqqani, who is drenched in so much of American blood, so many Gold Star mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and wives and husbands. Know who Sarajin Haqqani is, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't. And when they see this, if you don't think they're going to be upset, they're going to be. So, for all of my Afghan brothers and sisters, I still have hope because I have hope in you and I have hope in America's combat veterans that they will rise up and with a unified bipartisan voice start to make as much noise as humanly possible. If that will change policy or not, I tell you what, we will try our hardest to make the policy change as much as we can. And I just want all of my Afghan brothers and sisters to know that you're in my thoughts and you're in my prayers. And everybody at Grumpy Combat Veteran, which is filled with Afghan refugees that work behind the scenes to make all this stuff happen. Ramadan Mubarak. And I hope that the last week of Ramadan is endurable and that you end it with all your friends and family and you're able to celebrate a joyous occasion. So on behalf of everybody at Grumpy Combat Veteran, I hope the last week it provides you much better news than the last week did. So until next time, this is GCV and I'm out.